This meeting to order, regular meeting of the Board of Finance. And let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we don't have any minutes to approve?
Unfortunately, we don't, and yes, I'm sorry to report our regular clerk is had to step down. Her husband's having some health issues, and so, but we do have a pinch hitting clerk tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
We don't have those, but they're
Okay,
being
all
finalized
right.
off the recording, so they'll be in your pack. We'll approve two at the next.
Okay. Yeah, I so look forward to that. You know that. All right, so the first order of business is an update on the revaluation and initial grand list indications. So we have with us the assessor, Dave. Thank you. We are being recorded, so appreciate you using the microphone.
Evening. Evaluation has been in progress now for about a year and a half. Giving you a spreadsheet of where I think we're going to be when the purpose of the revaluation with two. One is required by law. Purpose really is to reallocate the tax burden according to that. So, the company has analyzed sales from January 1st of 16 up to October 1st of 17. Developed rates for that and then tested the results against sales to get an idea of where we fall in the relation to sold property. Keeping in mind that our nominal assessment ratio is 70% of what estimated is.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that, David.
The nominal assessment ratio is always 70%.
Right, okay, sorry, I just didn't hear you.
Of the estimated value. The actual ratio of the residential values compared to the sales of that period is about 66.4%.
66.1?
66.4. So we're at about 94.9% of value. If I looked at the sales from October 1st to the end of the calendar year, our value is our assessment to sale ratio was about 64%. We have to be we have to be at 70% plus or minus 10%. So between 63% and 77%. I don't want to be in the revaluation that winds up at 77%. But in theory, the state regulations allow that median ratio to be in average.
What was that time frame again, David? The later part of the year, was it September to December? where you were
October
tracking?
1st to
October.
Yeah, it's 3 months. The as you know, the notices have gone out, and the company is holding informal hearings now in the library, and I still hope to be able to finish by January 31st. If for some reason that's not going to happen, then I'll let you know, but that would be, I think the projections are probably still usable even if it gets extended. So, see there's the rate of change by category. This is the rate of change for the whole category, so it doesn't mean that an existing assessment with no difference in circumstances, same building, for example, went up by that amount. It includes new construction. And so the change in residential is about 5.7%. The overall is about 7.1%.
Do you have that broken down by category?
Yeah, I think.
Like, no, like, so the regular residential, do you have that broken down by
Right.
property value?
Oh, in bands of property value?
Bands of property value?
No, I haven't done
Right. Is that something that we would be able to have?
that. I probably can, maybe maybe for the next meeting or after the grand list. I could do that.
What's the, I asked the question again.
Tranche it. What's that?
What's
The
the,
chief house is going up at a different rate than the.
oh,
expensive
by
houses.
stratification of value?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I have not done that. I've really looked just at, focused on what the performance of the values is. That seems to be fairly well distributed in that respect. Could be a difference in.
I think what we were expecting is that the most expensive houses were gonna go down in value, because they're the ones that aren't selling well. And the lesser expensive houses will go up. I don't know if you're seeing that so far.
I didn't need, and I certainly saw some higher valued homes that are valued lower now.
Yeah.
That's true. So, I've broken it down, between the regular real estate and the state elderly program, because up until this year, we've been reimbursed for that, and so it was always backed out in the mill rate calculation. That may be something that finance director will want to present differently, may want to have it present differently, because it's going to be, if they're not going to reimburse it, it doesn't really have to be separated out, it's just part of real estate.
So you revalue the real estate. If you look at the grand list, I'm trying to reconcile back to, Sean, your comment last time we looked at this of 1 to 1.5% overall increase in the grand list. So where's the rest of it? Or why is that? Why is it not in the 5% range if all of these are up that much? Yeah, I couldn't remember. Yeah. So the numbers, just this, the actual results are higher than we had originally estimated. All right. Because at 1.5% to 2%, then mill rate adjustments don't feel that, but this, so we're gonna have, when we get around to doing the actual setting of a mill rate, we're gonna be off of, 5% is fairly substantial increase, right?
I have it ready in that location.
Okay. All right. It might be, it's more curiosity than, because we're not really at that point yet, but it would be interesting to see what it does to the mill rate.
But again, I just would go back and caution us to, I think Kevin's request is a really important one, because it's not gonna hit everybody equally.
Right.
Or it may not, I don't know that fact, but if it doesn't, then we need to, we don't wanna have that, be glib about saying, oh, well, the mill rate
Well, no, that's,
is not going up as much, but for some people whose house value is now valued much
Yeah.
higher, their actual tax bill, even if the mill rate stays the same,
Right.
is
So-
going to go up a lot.
So like mine went up 12%.
right.
Almost.
So
So-
I think we have to be careful about that.
Certainly. Having said that, the mill rate is applied against the assessed value regardless of whether it went up or down. We're not, unless there's some radical state change, we're not gonna have
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
different mill rates based on where you are.
Right.
Maybe you can explain so you'll finalize it by January 31st, and then there's an appeal process for people that don't like what happened. How does that work?
Once the list is completed, the appeal is to the Board of Assessment Appeals.
Right.
File a simple petition by one-page form by February 20th in the assessor's office. No later than March 1st, we have to have the notices out to those folks of when to appear before the Board of Assessment Appeals. And then they'll meet probably with one member of the board the board will get together and make the decision.
So I've never been through this drill. What percentage of those appeals are granted or not, or does this sort of smooth it out a little bit, or?
I would say there are quite a few of the folks who feel find some change. They may not be.
Lisa?
A question for you. Sometimes we hear out there that different assessors can take a conservative approach to assessment or an aggressive. Obviously, if you evaluate homes at a higher level, the mill rate is lower because there's more value. What can you talk about any discretion that your consultant used or that you have? Does that exist, or is it just a formula that everyone uses?
I think by being in that mid 90% range, it's a somewhat conservative approach.
What does that mean? Can you explain that?
Well, what that 94 or 92, whatever it is that you take the value full value by the selling and rank those ratios with the middle. So from the standpoint of what the state would say, that number has to be within 10%. If you aim for 100% as your median, by definition, half of your value is over something. It's still considered a good result, but I think if you're a little conservative, I think that's enough. It's near enough that it's not discriminating against other forms of property.
So, but that's your discretion or the
Yeah, I mean, I have
consultant's?
to accept
Okay.
what they give me.
And does conservative mean that, I'm not sure I followed all
That
that.
home
Yeah.
values are lower,
That
so
home
mill
values
rates are
are,
higher.
That I value.
most home values are less than 100% of the market, or?
I would say, yeah, that the median is, I mean, you easily find cases where our value is higher. than this.
Right, but we're erring on the side of not
Erring a little on-
overvalue. Okay, I just wanted to define what conservative was.
Less appeals as opposed to more.
Right.
And ultimately, the real test is it consistently applied?
Mhm.
But it does speak to sort of this ongoing issue that we have of mill rates high,
Value.
values are lower, so that the tax, but the headline mill rate for Simsbury is high.
Exactly.
Right. It's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, January, when this is finalized, then it will be actionable for us as we think about the budgets. And then there'll be some noise from the appeals process that goes into February.
Right.
But,
I've tried to take account of that in my projection.
Okay.
That last line after the BAA. It's my guess.
oh, Board of Appeals, okay.
But that's.
All right.
on previous experience.
Is that the historical difference? What you put in your estimate?
Well, it isn't that much though. If you look at the column for 2016,
Yeah.
that is the change in that year.
Right.
That's what actually happened, $1.5 million on assessment. So I'm using roughly 2 for this year.
So just a couple of more questions, looking at this for the first time in detail, David. So apartment buildings have gone up by 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Property tax, personal property, do renters pay personal property tax?
Now, this is other than motor vehicles, no.
Oh, so personal property tax is just business?
This is personal property.
Okay,
pay
we don't pay
primarily.
personal property tax. We do. Okay, that makes sense.
define these shorthands here? I can guess commercial, industrial, vacation land. apartment buildings.
Vacant land.
Oh, vacant land.
Yeah,
Oh,
vacant land.
I was like, how many vacation properties are there here? Vacant land. Well, that's why I'm asking. 'Cause I don't know what
It's a
these
good
are.
question.
And what's reg real?
Regular real, in other words, to distinguish it from the
That's the total,
the
total.
elderly.
all real estate.
It counts under the elderly program.
Oh, so this is the addition. Okay.
Yes. And then there's state elderly, which has special classification.
Yeah, the state elderly, I mean, the assessment is the same. It's just, as anything else, it's just that we had been getting,
It's
A
the same as the one
reimbursement.
above.
right, we had been
The
getting a
ones they qualify
reimbursement.
for.
So when your mill rate
Yeah.
calculation, this is broken out,
They qualify for a discount.
right, the state used to
That's-
reimburse that.
Yeah. Not so much anymore.
And you notice on our, yes, theoretically, our mill rate sheet gets slightly less.
Right.
We're not talking about huge dollars. It would simplify.
We still have veterans tax, right? That's not.
That's
separate.
an exemption, so it's already out of the, it's an
Sorry.
exemption, so it's already not in the total.
All right. Any other questions for David?
Last one, on the apartment buildings, I'm assuming the 50% went up. A lot of that's driven by new build.
Right, new
If-
construction.
If
right.
you took out the new construction, what would the increase be in the value of apartments that are currently existing?
It's a range, that the older ones, I don't think change very much. But some of the other newer ones, even though we're complete, I think I remember seeing a couple of them that are above 30%.
What would
Value.
drive that increase?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is well, really, these are income producing properties. So the two main things, right, versus what's the net operating income, and what rate is that going to be capitalized at? So in the last revaluation, we were using a combined capitalization rate of 9.8%. That included something for the tax rate. In this one, for the better apartments, they're using 8.5%, including tax. So even if the net operating income had stayed the same, value would have gone.
Are those estimated NOIs or are those provided to you by the landlords? Do they give you real numbers?
They do. And then the appraiser also developed models, so try to look at both.
So,
Ask one more acronym. What does after BA mean?
Board of
Or
Assessment.
assessment appeals. Oh, okay.
Right, yeah.
It's the sheep that comes in. Tells us.
And one last, perhaps request, are you, if you're able, maybe for next month's meeting, can you break out the percent change into how much of it is accountable for by new construction versus actual change in value of the old property?
At least partially, I think probably. I don't, certainly eliminate those that were zero before. Yeah. Would be easy.
I mean, I just think, when you look at some of these increases, they look huge, but some of that might be because there's new construction.
Big part of it. Not a lot of new construction on regular residential houses.
It also depends on when it was built and how quickly they lease up. So you have crossover from one year to the next. Right.
Right.
Kind of stuff.
All right. Anything else for David? Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
I do think now you've piqued my curiosity, so why don't you show us what that means?
You can come sit closer to me. I won't bite, I promise.
I need to take this too.
I think people will figure out who you are anyway.
Just a second.
too.
Great job.
Little, hard to see. You guys see it okay? Okay. So this is how we left it last
Okay.
changes. This is, you'll see our 100% assumption. These numbers here are actually so this will be, approximate.
Yeah, no, just to give us an order of magnitude.
Yep. So this one would be the 7. This one is 7.1%, and that gets very close. Elderly homeowner. Well, again, I don't know. Well, I'll go ahead and put it in here. We may still have to back that up. But it's not a big deal. Personal property, 2.3. And then motor vehicle, actually a little less than I had before, 0.8. So there it is, total 6.4, so that ties to David's sheet. So now,
Lowry goes down to
here,
36.
if I undo all that, you'll see before we had left it based on the assumptions, and this includes, the $1 million use of fund balance, and we can move these around here, but
Yeah.
we had discussed ending up at a town mill rate of 38.26, coming to a total of 39.49, down from our 39.99. If I read those that I just did, and if that's where we end up, there's no adjustment for the Board of Assessment Appeals, it's relatively small. That would drop the mill rate to 36.52, a total of 37.75, and no change to the expenditure lines or anything else. I haven't adjusted it out the elderly, I don't think, from this model yet, but that's, again, wouldn't move the dial too much. But just to give you a ballpark, down from 39.5 to roughly 37.7.
Your worksheet prorates, so there's a reduction in the fire district tax as well, or not?
It is not right now. That is a static number,
That's a hard number?
the 1.23, right? So
So
Okay.
it's a tricky one. I can check certainly with the fire district about where their thinking is. We can certainly calculate what we think it would be. They obviously don't vote on their budget till their May annual. So, we usually focus primarily on our own mill rate. I know, notwithstanding last year, but combined, obviously matters.
But their mill rate will be against the higher grand list also, so,
Yep. So that should theoretically go down.
right.
And
All right, so that's good. That's enough for tonight. I think everybody sort of sees what that does. And Maura, we'll send you this, the sheet that we put up for everybody to see, so.
Perfect, thank you.
All right,
just at the risk of stating the blindingly obvious, I just want to make sure that maybe our viewers understand that just because that mill rate would go down doesn't mean total tax revenues are diminishing. And it therefore also doesn't mean there's loads more room for bigger increases. Just making sure everyone
Exactly.
understands that.
right.
But their car tax would go down, wouldn't it, Sean?
Car tax is going
well,
up.
the car tax is going up
Wow.
over what we billed for the current year.
We had capped the car tax based on what we were afraid the state might do,
Yep,
Maura.
okay.
So now it's contemplated for the next
Okay.
fiscal year, we would charge the same mill rate on cars that we do on on everything else. So, and I'll state also the obvious, which is that this one fact that we have gotten closer to becoming a hard fact today is just one important piece of the whole big puzzle. So I'm basically saying the same thing that Linda said, except that I think it's important as we have this dialogue evolving that for those whose assessments did go up, they will have an impact that well, everyone will have the same impact, whether your assessment went up or down, but that will be mitigated somewhat by a lower mill rate, all things else being equal, budgets being approved, and everything else that we have to do between now and when we vote on this in May or June. All right? All right,
Can I
great.
say one more thing?
Sure.
David may have said this in the beginning, and I missed it, but and also stating the obvious that the state makes us go through. We're required to go through the evaluation process. It's not something we chose to do at this time. We were actually, under state statute, required to do so.
Right. He did lead by we were required to do this, so.
Gotcha.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an elective process on our part.
Right.
Okay. Good enough for now. Appreciate that. Thank you, David, for hard work. I know the Board of Assessment Appeals now gets to go earn their keep, so that'll be good. All right, fine. So the next topic, which is sort of an interesting segue as we move through the beginnings of the budgeting process, is to have a little bit more detailed discussion about the topic we began to discuss at our last meeting relative to the insurance fund. Bob Lindbergh, okay, was here with us and shared some of those issues. We discussed the appropriateness without having really any motions or determinations about how we might accomplish finding an appropriate level of reserves for both OPEB and the service trust. Is that what they call it?
Internal Service Fund.
Internal Service Fund, okay. And in the meantime, Sean, in his one of many hats, has spoken to both town attorneys and others about sort of methods that we get that, and maybe we share that with the group, and then we can have a discussion.
Sure.
Not going to make any decisions tonight, but I want to keep this dialogue going as we, because it is going to be an important aspect of both the town and the Board of Ed's budget relative to these expenses and fund balances.
So, thank you. Yeah, and let me start with, and there is still more information to gather, and I definitely want to hear from you guys where there may be more pieces that you're looking for, what your thoughts are based on a lot of information we shared last meeting. I did talk extensively multiple times with Becky Seelman, who's been our actuary for Milliman for a long time, and including in May of 2007, the trust. And she was able to fill me in on a few important pieces of information. One of which, and I now have the original trust document as well. Contributions themselves, and stop me if this gets confusing. Some nuance here. The contributions themselves to the OPEB trust are irrevocable. So that is actually a requirement when you set up the trust. GASB number 3. We can't, to the extent we're talking about pulling money out of the trust, we really can't. So that I think is important. I know that's a clarity, a little bit of a clarifying point from what we were talking about before. What you can do, and we can talk this through, is begin to use the trust for what it was established for, which is to fund and pay for retiree health expenses. So that is the purpose of the trust. Now, obviously, when they first set this up for $100,000, $150,000, there's not enough in there to pay those. Now, with a balance in the $13 million, it certainly is possible. But I want to explain the mechanics of what that would look like, because I think it's definitely important to impact. If you think about it this way, what we do now from our operating budget, think about the Board of Ed's operating budget, town's operating. We budget for, just like our pension, we budget for an ARC, an annual required contribution. The actuaries calculate for us. Now, paying that ARC is voluntary. As a AAA community, we pride ourselves on paying our pension ARC and our ARC, and then some, of course, in future more money. The important piece to know, if we were to, let's say we wanted to use the trust for its intended purpose for the first year, roughly retiree claims between the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen are roughly, call it $1 million, 1.1. What we do now, though, is when the actuaries calculate our ARC as part of the budget planning process. We get an OPEB valuation. I'll receive them in the past. Send out the most recent. We're waiting for the current one to come through soon. When they calculate an ARC, the way Simsbury is always done, is an ARC is calculated around $1.2 million. OPEB. Then a deduction is taken for expected retirement benefit. And what we budget from what's called the net budget impact, stop me if this gets confusing, is the net of those two. So we are effectively enjoying a lower actual budget hit in the general fund budget because we are paying retiree claims on an ongoing basis out of. Does that make sense so far? So the challenge with starting to use that money, you can't count it twice. So the options at budget time would either be to increase our budget by $8 or $7 or $800,000 in our budget line in the operating. Doesn't really accomplish the goal. Or to admit that we're not going to fully fund the ARC. Theoretically, we could. If we put it in our CAFR, we'd say, we show every year we paid 100%. What we'd be effectively doing is that you're paying more like 15%. If we were using the funds, but not increasing the budget on the general fund. So I say all this because as I've thought more about it with that information, my personal recommendation is more along the lines of there's capacity in the general fund reserves, even at some sort of smaller dollar amount than the full million. I personally am more comfortable there than making any change to our sort of historic ARC funding policy. I know Rob mentioned last time that came up when we were on our ratings call. They were very impressed with our OPEB history and OPEB contributions, and including our OPEB fund balance. But it has the markings of sort of one of those one-time fixes, and those are the kind of things that I feel like the agency.
So I'm sorry, I didn't reread my notes from last time, but I know we talked about this. I thought I was recalling that last time we were told that we had a legal opinion that whatever we contributed, we could move around as long as we weren't as rating it entirely.
So I had that right. I had been told that by my predecessor, but in talking to the actuaries, now we don't have a legal opinion on this yet. But after I've read the trust document, and the first sentence is, the town is establishing hereby an irrevocable trust. We can get more clarity on this. Maybe there's a nuance here that I'm missing. But it does seem to make sense. If you're going to have this out there on your balance sheet as a trust to be used exclusively for retirement benefits, they probably wouldn't want you establishing in such a way that you could pull money out every other year.
Yeah. So I sort of see this as a geography problem rather than a real question of, so we sort of started by saying there are 2 or 3 ways we could, we started by saying we need more money in the health our service trust. I'll never get that right. What is it called? Internal service trust. Okay. And so the first thing we thought was, well, let's just take back the excess money that we took out of that fund to put into OPEB. That seemed like sort of an easy fix. We're saying now that certainly at a minimum, a very strong difference of opinion whether we can do that or not. The second way would be to underfund OPEB and overfund the internal service fund. And that would impact operating budgets. But as Sean just described it, it will be not exposed, but will be explained in our CAFR, which stands for CAFR, Annual Financial Report. Is it consolidated? Comprehensive, which is much better than being consolidated. Okay. So there will be a disclosure relative to the ARC, which is interesting, especially to rating agencies and those that look about whether how we're taking care of our pension. Or we could, the third alternative, which we also discussed, is just allocate from our general fund money to the internal service fund so that it has an appropriately high level so that we can absorb good and bad years of claim experience without having to always fund it. I think that's where we started with this, when Matt and I talked about it originally. Burke explained it. So what I mean by geography is that it's gonna, we have a general fund balance. We need more of that in the other. That doesn't change our overall strength. It just allocates it to a place where it could be appropriately used for, this operating exposure that fluctuates year to year based on claim experience. And if we decide to do that, then that will impact the amount of taxes we have to charge the taxpayers to keep appropriate general reserves and to pay our operating expenses. So I think, Sean, what additional information will we gather before? I'm not suggesting we make a decision tonight. I just want to prep what we're going to know when we get down to making a decision. Ask everybody's opinion.
Sure. I mean, I think one key piece of information that Burke and I would like to get from Bob Lindbergh is an estimate of, now, remember, the health insurance rates ultimately evolve even as we're going through the budget process. They're always looking at more real-time data. They start to true up a little, but it would be nice to know from him if we moved X dollars, multiple X, Y, dollars, 500,000, 750 million. What would we see from the operating budget?
Right. What's the
impact?
threshold for that fund?
And right, exactly.
Right.
So that will obviously impact whether this seems
Right.
like a good idea or a good deal. And I think that's a key piece. I can certainly run it through the town attorney, and
You need to take that?
and I think I would like to get, we have our actuary's opinion, and she's certainly well versed in these, but we don't have a formal legal opinion on this yet. Although if the feeling of the board is that we should get that either way, I'm happy to go back and get that. If we're leaning away from transferring from OPEB, necessary. I think some research on their
What's
part.
the net numbers that we have to contribute? Do we know? I'm sorry.
Well, we've been talking about $1 million,
Okay.
but I don't know that we've
So you
really
don't
done,
know.
we haven't really drilled down on on whether that would achieve the goal of helping, especially the Board of Ed's budget, absorb, if you have this much money in the tank and you're spending like this, then you have to always budget for sort of the high end of the range. If you have that much money and you're spending like this, then maybe you could ease that so that the idea is that the operating budget estimate, which is what goes into our approved budget, is, it has a margin of error now, which is much less because of the fund balance being higher. I think that's, so you can actually budget a little tighter. Would that be a fair way to say what we're trying to do, Burke?
I think that's pretty much right. That's it. I mean,
Wasn't, he had a chart of how the fund balances flowed from year to year.
yeah,
I thought that was helpful.
it is. Yeah, and there's a lot of, I mean, especially when you look over time, there's no doubt you can have good claim years, bad claim years. Unfortunately, in health insurance, it
You
takes
can't project that,
one or
right?
two, premature babies or something that heart attack. And we had 2 years. We had 24 months. That's really the interesting. We had 24 months that were just amazing. And that is what was before the 2015
Right.
15 transfer. And then we kind of had 24 months. They weren't the worst ever, but they were not even average. They were a little worse. And it definitely, in hindsight, that was a lot of, a contribution in 1 year. Now, and I pulled this up. This is straight out of our CAFR, only just to try to show where this would show up in one spot. This is actually the beginning, the management discussion piece. But we always show, and this is last year's CAFR, of course, but, what our ARC was, which again, that was 1.8 million. We contributed 1.9, so we contributed 100% of the ARC, right? This is the year we made the extra 3 million, right? In addition to 1.88, another $3 million transfer. And that had the effect of pulling down the ARC by $800,000. Now, what I say on a budget impact, we, if our expected health and, retiree claims that year were roughly $950,000. From a budget standpoint, we only budget delta between the two because we are not using our health trust. That's the way Simsbury is done. And so in that way, the trust itself is a one-way street, but we're not dumping in $1 million at a time. But we're also not paying the claim, so the actual is great. We're
So
just
the
putting
fund
more money
balance
in.
keeps going up.
Right. And then as the markets, like this last year, the markets were trusted very well. And that certainly should have a positive effect on our. But again, we start using these, so to speak, and not making up for it on the budget side, we will not be technically funding 115 or 100%.
Do anybody have a comment on this, or?
So we essentially or potentially protecting ourselves against an investment swing or a market swing based on where our funds are invested? Because you said we had a really good.
Aren't these funds are all in Simsbury Bank, so
So
they're not in the market, which,
You just made a market.
no, they are.
There.
No, these are through LPL Financial. They're managed. They're just not actively managed.
oh, so they're in
remember from-
ETFs and fund, mutual funds?
Right, they're all mutual funds. We would look at them at, so these are reviewed from the retirement subcommittee. You may recall, they
Right.
come in and talk about both the DB plan, the DC plan, but also the open trust. But right now, those are not actively managed. There's still
There's a portfolio,
there's a portfolio, exactly.
right? They're just used the ETFs.
Okay.
Versus mutual. So the balance is being actively managed, is just within the individual investments.
Okay.
Aren't being managed.
And there's an IPS, there's still an IPS that says, different 25%. There's all those different tiers, but they're all kept. There's been discussion about potentially.
So that's where I thought.
Like, and unless I'm reading that wrong, are we potentially then protecting ourselves against a market swing by funding, let's say, $1 million? If the
well.
investments don't do as well,
Next year, right.
Right.
Yeah, you could,
18, 19,
we started using it. Yeah,
Yeah, this is sort of in addition to that. It's both.
this has always been one of those, again, we're kind of trailblazers a little bit with the OPEB. We are farther ahead in our funding. Rob will recall from the analyst comment when we were on the rating that we're sort of in uncharted territory. When this thing is set up, a lot of towns, it was good enough just to set up, then it was good enough to have. We are, at a certain point, we'll be 100% funded. And the decision does need to be made eventually. When do we want to start using it?
As a baseline, could we just fund the amount of the negative experience in the year so that the fund doesn't grow? That seems like sort of the baseline.
Right? Of the
Because-
negative experience.
Yeah,
Of the claims.
The
claims experience,
right.
yeah. Not negative, but the claims experience. But you don't know that before the fact.
Yeah, we
you
don't know
only-
before, but we know even Milliman does an estimate each year. In fact, been within 100,000. Higher claim. They have.
system.
All right, so let's all think about this. I think this will be something that we will look at as we the budget.
If you have questions or want to send me questions about that,
What's our investment assumption on OPEB? Is it the same as our pensions?
it is now the same as, I want to say in 2016, we moved down from 7.5 to 7 to make sure they were both at 7. Just further, I know at the last retirement subcommittee, we discussed that. Actually have.
All
The
right.
state of Connecticut is now just barely ahead of us.
They are.
Is that right?
They did 6.99.
Down
I think.
from-
They like it starting with a 6.
From 8. Yeah.
So kudos.
All right, thanks, we appreciate that. All right, all right, the next item of business is approval of supplemental appropriation request for a $76,000 donation from the Friends of Simsbury Farms, as approved and recommended by the Board of Selectmen. I think Sean provided us all with memos and background. Do you want to, I mean, I guess a donor made a $76,000, single anonymous donor?
Yeah, a single anonymous donor to the Friends of Simsbury Farms, who is interested specifically in new basketball courts, I believe, 2 courts. And this was presented to the Board of Selectmen. They've received, so there's an arrangement, I think there should be an attachment in your packet. Yeah, on the town attorney's letterhead. On the agreement we've worked out, they didn't want to donate the money all up front. Better, they wanted to keep some input and oversight, although we as the town want to manage the project, cut the checks. So ultimately, what I'm requesting and what the Board of Selectmen approved and recommended, a supplemental appropriation, the revenue for which will be the donation as they come in. But ultimately, what we're going to be doing is spending the money, showing them the invoice, billing, invoicing them. For
Right. So this is the mechanism by which the money gets spent and then first.
It's a little bit of new territory for, I mean, the Friends of Simsbury Farms, relatively new. We're trying to establish good arrangements for these sort of situations. And I think this is gonna work well.
Is it held in escrow, or is it contractual that they send?
It is contractual that they pay. We have not received it.
Trust me.
A little bit of trust.
And most importantly, where are the basketball courts going to be and what are they going to look like?
They'll be at Simsbury Farms.
We at
I know
Simsbury
that, but
Farms,
where at the farms? Come on.
where the old 2 tennis courts are.
Near the.
Visually, I can't picture
Okay.
it, but
Near the current.
Yeah. Oh,
I think the old, right. Fairness, I
Are
haven't
they
been
going to
up
be
there.
lighted?
They are going to be possibly like discussion about having at least
That's enough question.
right now they're daytime.
All right, so any other specific questions about that? So I need an appropriate, or a motion to approve a $76,000 appropriation, supplemental appropriation that's backed up by a $76,000 revenue donation.
so moved.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Pearl. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Moira?
Lost her.
Yeah, all right.
Aye.
Thank you, thank you.
What's that mute button?
Okay, great. And before we adjourn, I would just mention one other item, which is that we can say on the record that we much enjoyed working with Sean, and we're thrilled for you personally and professionally for your great opportunity, and we're grateful for the way you set this up to be here to help us through this transition. And we wish you really well. We'll get to do that one more time before you finally get out of here. However, in the meantime, we have to find somebody to replace Sean. So we will be working on that. And I have asked if Lisa would help me, and Eric and I have spoken, be part of the representatives of the Board of Finance as we go through a recruitment, consulting, and selection process for the new board of, our director of finance. Of course, our new town manager will be ultimately very involved in this process as well. But we felt, Eric and I especially, that we should get started because the clock is ticking. So get something very, very good.
How
Either
long
in,
do we have you, Sean?
So I began in Cheshire on May 1st.
April 30th?
April, I think that's like a
April 30, 4:30 PM.
uh,
All right,
right around. Nothing
great.
Thank you.
All right, any other new business or old business?
So just from, went to the subcommittee meeting
Okay,
last week, so, right, then we talked about the numbers. They didn't have the final numbers in, but the numbers were ranging anywhere from, say, 13 to 15% total return.
appreciation,
Appreciation in the individual.
Subcommittee, is it?
This, the pension.
Pension.
Okay.
So, yeah. And then they touched briefly about thinking about moving the investments away from Simsbury Bank not an actively managed individual ETF portfolio
That's
over
what I was,
to
so it was, the money is at Simsbury Bank, but it's invested in their security, in the.
The ETFs.
Okay, all right.
because it was kind of proposed but
That's
not really
what I was-
moved because it would be too much work during a change of finance director. That's what we ended up coming down with. Little minor tweaks to the portfolio. They removed one money manager on the actively managed funds. And then I think there was a small discussion about decreasing the overall rate of return, expected rate of return, right? So we're at 7% now, and there was a little bit of talking about a 6.5% increase going forward. So, which has a effect on how well funded
It
it
needs to be.
becomes
Right.
after we make that change.
Right.
And the timing of it. So I think Becky Seelman's going to be ready to talk about her recommendations. Right now, we're probably roughly.
All right. Great. Good meeting.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Maura.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mara. I'm gonna hang up on you.